Hi, I'm Chris Colvin. I'm the host of GCtv, which is a monthly broadcast on which we interview General Counsel and other in-house leaders about their careers and about their advice to other lawyers who would like to have similar success in an in-house career. I'm also the founder of In the House, which is a community that empowers in-house counsel by providing educational, thought leadership, professional networking opportunities, and more. You can learn more about In the House at www.inthehouse.org. I'd also like to thank our sponsor for GCtv, Select Counsel. Select Counsel is a network of over 300 lawyers who work for innovative law firms that would like to use technology and improve business practices to better align their operations with the needs of general counsel and other in-house clients. You can learn more about Select Counsel at www.selectcounsel.law. I'm delighted today to be interviewing Lauren Zajac. She is the Chief Legal Officer at Workhuman. So why don't we start out, Lauren, just by, if you could, share with us a little bit about your current company, about your role at the company, and about the career journey that took you to where you are now.
Sure. So I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Legal Officer for a company called Workhuman. We used to be called Global Force. I have been here for 12 years, and we are an employee recognition company with a performance management solution as well. We are in what's called the human capital management space. But essentially what we do is create a solution that allows employees to recognize and thank, to give gratitude to other employees. So by a long shot, this is in my career that I will not name how many years I've been at this job. But this is by far the most fun because we are essentially in the thank you business.
That's great. And tell me a little bit about your role as chief legal officer at the company and the types of things you do day to day.
Sure. So when I started here, this is my third or fourth general counsel role. But when I started here at Global Force, then I was the only lawyer for many years. So I was sort of being reactionary, putting out fires, if you will. Now I have the pleasure of having a good, strong team of contract negotiators and compliance folks. But the general day-to-day practice is really, as I said, a balance of being reactionary, putting out fires, right? So that means I come in and on any given day, I can have compliance issues, I can have employee matters, I can have, our IP portfolio issues. We're rolling out a new product on a product roadmap and having to advise very quickly my product folks and my executives. So it's sort of half that and half, to the extent that you get the time, sort of thinking strategically about how to innovate best practices in managing your legal department, in managing your group, in making sure that you are employing things like contract management, negotiation, the skills that underlie keeping a corporate entity structure, right? We are an Irish company with a couple of wholly owned subsidiaries. So managing all of those entities and keeping all of that process in line is definitely part of it. So I would say it's really a mix of kind of what are the fires that I need to put out today, and how can I take some of the innovation and some of the process improvements that I have as far-reaching goals down the path today.
So one of the things, thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting. One of the things we are doing at GCtv is trying to shed light on the very interesting career paths that bring people to the GC chair. So I would love to hear a bit more about your career path from undergraduate to law school and your legal career and what led you to where you are today.
So my family tells a funny story that when I was 7 years old, I started telling everyone that I wanted to be a lawyer. Not sure how. I think as I kind of trace it back, I think that I must have seen some sort of description of, not that I put a lot of weight in astrology and your zodiac symbol, but but mine is Libra, so it's the scales of justice. I think I must have seen that and seen some description that those people make great lawyers, but I decided that right then and there that I was going to tell everyone I was going to be a lawyer, and I stuck to it. So I went to Boston College for undergrad. For a brief moment, I varied, and I was an English literature major, and thought I would do something more in that field, but then kind of came back to the path. Went directly from undergrad to law school. Knew I always wanted to be in technology. My dad actually spent his career, he was an engineer by trade, but spent his career in technology, lots of startup companies. And so we always had technology in the house. We always had kind of the first of the PCs and you know, what then was the newest technology. So I think that was always my experience. It was part of growing up. So I knew that's where I wanted to go. I also had, I think because of his connections and the folks that I knew that were colleagues of his, I certainly was able to hear the parlance and the discussion amongst people who were in that technology field, and certainly in a world that was burgeoning and new. So it was even more appealing to me. And I think because of that, I was able to connect with some mentors early on, especially when I was kind of going from high school into college, saying, is this even a viable thing? Can I be a technology counsel, and how do I do it? So lucky enough, I had those mentors sort of behind me, went to law school, and focused on really blanketing every technology company in my whole area, just trying to get in. And I was very lucky to come right out of law school into a company which was an XML markup company called Object Design. And I was the second counsel there, very small company, to someone who has become a mentor and will be forever. And it was really a trial by fire. I mean, certainly you learn skills in law school that are helpful. I think, you know, contracts law was one of the things that I relied on heavily, but the rest of it was really, as I said, just experience, trial by fire. I remember the first contract negotiation I sat in on, and this person who I was reporting to would just sort of have me sit in and listen to a software license negotiation and try to pick up the language and the provisions, and eventually turned it over to me. I will say that the first few were not the smoothest negotiations I've ever entered into. I can remember sort of flubbing up the word indemnification quite a few times, but it was really trial by fire. And you know, I've had the distinct pleasure of doing this for well over 20 years. Now I don't flub up the word indemnification. But it really, you know, I don't think there's anything that really can prepare you for a general counsel role, because it is such a unique balance of trying to walk that line of, you know, you have law firm lawyers have multiple clients, and you can see sort of a variety of issues. It's really unique to have all of those issues be seen through one lens, right? Your one client is this company. So every issue that comes to you, I think if you're a good in-house lawyer, you continually learn what those business objectives are of your client. And the more you can see those issues through that lens, the better you become. So it's, for me, that's been the most fun part of it, is being able to just really get stuck into every process of the company, to understand what makes that company tick, and to be able to advise on those issues and really drive the strategy of the company, the business objectives of the company with a legal view.
I really love your focus on business objectives, because I've given advice to young outside lawyers in many cases to try to build a practice whereby they know what the work they're doing, they know what business objective of their client they're trying to serve. And I think it is unfortunately still probably more the rule than the exception that even very high achieving outside lawyers often don't know the business objective of their client that underlies a particular legal matter. So I encourage younger lawyers to just ask.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to be working with you on this, but could you let me know a little bit more about what your business objective is that might be driving this legal process? And I think by knowing that, you can really, both whether you're inside or outside counsel. You can really fine tune your advice to be much more effective. But there's a couple interesting strands in your career that I want to pick up on, or two specific strands. One is the idea of technology being integral to your desire to practice law. I think that's very interesting. And I also think it's interesting that apparently you wanted to go right into in-house practice as opposed to the maybe a more typical career path of going to a law firm for several years. So let's take sort of each of those in turn. Could you share a little bit more about your decision to go directly in-house, and were you ever interested in going to a firm, or was that not really something that appealed to you?
So I did a few summer associateships at firms before I went in-house, and then obviously came right out of law school and went in-house. I think really what colored that decision, and certainly didn't have the know-how, right, or the understanding that I have now. I think that what was appealing, although I probably couldn't have articulated it at that point, was hearing those conversations, right? The business conversations that I was exposed to, understanding what my father did, for example, and overhearing some of those conversations. It was always appealing to me, how to move a business forward, how to achieve results, how to roll out a new product, and all the things you needed to think about. So while that was very interesting to me, and I sort of was sticking to my I'm going to be a lawyer thing, I was very fortunate to have met, I think, sort of the most impactful mentor I had, a female in-house counsel at then Digital, who sort of touched base with me and then became a mentor ongoing through college, and sort of understood that there was this thing of in-house practice, and that was a great way to bring those two things together. That not only could you sort of use your skills to help a business grow, but that you could do that in the practice of law for one client, for a company. So that was really, once I kind of learned that was even a thing, it was an aha moment, like, oh, well, there you go. I can bring these two things together, and I have not regretted it one day since.
No, that's a wonderful story. I'm also curious about technology, because I think it's fair to say that many people may go to law school to avoid technology. I think that's I hear that a lot, at least. I happen to have a background as an IP lawyer, so I was an engineer first. So for me, I've always thought about technology in the law for obvious reasons because of my professional background. But I'm curious, other than your dad's being involved in technology companies, sort of what drew you to technology, and what has it meant for you to be a lawyer that always has an eye on technology and the importance of technology?
Yeah, I think, as I said, aside from that sort of being part of my background in growing up, what was appealing the most, I think, was, once I got into law school and sort of understood all of the avenues you could take with that, what was appealing to me then was about, it seemed like a new area to me, right? That certainly with respect to copyright, for example, there was a pretty heady body of work on protecting music and literature, and it was still something that was ongoing. How do we protect this new thing? How do we protect code? What are all the iterations of the protections and the ways that the laws need to change to address this new industry, for lack of a better term? So that was always appealing. I think what's continued to keep it appealing to me is I think very much my nature is always sort of to push the edge, right? And one of the things I've seen in my entire career has been in technology. And it really has afforded me the privilege of working with folks that are doing the same thing, of pushing the envelope, of being on the leading edge, of finding new and better ways to do things, or thinking of brand new ways to do things that no one thought of. So it's sort of satisfied, being in technology and being counsel to those folks has satisfied a bunch of those things, right? It's satisfied that curiosity, put you in touch with people that think just out of the box all the time. And I think it's even more challenging from an in-house perspective to sort of counsel those folks, right? Because they don't want to be hamstrung. They want to think out of the box and do these new innovative things. And, you've got to stay lockstep with those folks if you want to be effective counsel. And it's challenging and rewarding at the same time to be in technology, for sure.
Yes, lawyers were trying to figure out what box to put things in.
Yes,
If
yeah.
your client's constantly trying to get out of those boxes, that could be both challenging and fascinating, I imagine.
Yeah, now we don't put things in boxes, we put them in the cloud, so it's all good.
Exactly. So let's stick with the technology theme for a moment, but then let's talk about maybe how you've used technology in your own legal practice in-house. So turning from your client's technology to your views about what role technology plays in building a legal department and being a successful general counsel. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on
Sure.
that topic.
Yeah, it's so certainly being in this world, I see a lot of, and I think like other general counsels, right? We are always sort of um, receiving quite a bit of input from the new latest piece of technology, the tool that your legal department can use to fast track or simplify a process. Um, by and large, I think I have sort of eschewed some of those that try to do too much. I mean, I think one of the things, especially in my role and in the companies that I've served, who have mostly been kind of just post startup or kind of SMB, kind of that area. I think one of the things that's hard to do is take some of those technologies. And look, I've been on the side of creating technology with my folks internally, so I get that you want to have the thing that has all the bells and whistles. I think sometimes for folks that serve the market segment that I have, some of those things that try to do too much, especially for general counsels of a smaller department or solo, it's hard to implement those things because you just frankly don't have time.
Right.
So I have certainly used some tools. I am currently using some tools that we use a contract management system that actually is driven by AI, natural language. We use link squares to be able to search our contracts, and it's just one of the things that's kind of a cool technology. But what it does, in sort of following what the line of thinking I was just going down, is it's sort of it's not an end-to-end solution for law, legal department management. It doesn't try to do too much. I think one of the things I would love to see, and I think we're starting to see more of this, the more that innovation in this space grows and the more that there's a focus on smaller or solo legal departments for technology, pieces that are sort of touchless or low touch, that don't take a lot to implement, that you can kind of use right off the bat, from my perspective, are more helpful. I think certainly if you've got a very large department, if you've got a very large budget, if you've got a lot of time in your hands to do a very complex implementation, you can look at other things. But from my perspective, the things that have worked best are the areas where you can kind of just plug and play something and kind of have it add value pretty quickly.
Right. I think that's actually a great observation because there's been kind of an appification of our lives, if I can coin
Yeah.
that term. And I
Yeah.
think as professionals, we sometimes look for something as simple as an app to say,
Yeah.
well, if I have an app that I can use for video conferencing or for what have you, why can't I have simple apps that are just like plug and play to help enhance my world here? And
Yes.
hopefully the legal tech vendors are listening and will start to think about those types of tools, because I think a long training period is difficult, especially for a resource scarce environment. And I think it's not too much of a generalization to say that a lot of legal departments inhabiting the cost side of a business, whether it's a large legal department or a small one, they're almost by definition resource strained, or constrained. So
I agree.
I
Yeah.
think legal tech vendors need to learn from that and start to deliver immediately accessible solutions.
Hmm.
So I think that's a really good observation. Another thing I wanted to pick up on in one of your earlier answers, you mentioned a mentor, and I would love to hear your thoughts on what is your advice for lawyers that are looking to succeed as in-house counsel at various stages in their career, and how can they find mentors? It might be it seems a little more challenging to in a law firm. It's maybe more obvious,
Yeah.
find a partner that you think might appreciate your work, and that could be your mentor. But what about finding mentors in the in-house counsel world? How would you recommend that people do that?
So one of the things that's been really helpful, I mean, obviously I had the benefit of having someone who was sort of a mentor as I was a student and coming out. But if you're in the in-house role, I mean, I've certainly both menteed folks and sought out mentors. I think one of the things that I think is the key, And again, it's part of this unique aspect of being a general counsel. And this is the advice that I give to all sorts of folks, right? Young law school students, college students looking to go to law school. If you are interested in the in-house role, I think that the thing to do is to try to find an interest or an industry that you are at least moderately passionate about. That certainly helps. The other thing is to sort of pay attention to your client. I think that it's certainly been part of the most fun aspect of my job, is to kind of get stuck in with a new company and then sort of sit back and pay attention a little bit. Well, who in the finance role is making the decisions on our processes, and who's the salesperson that seems, even if not the leader, and it's not always obvious, you sort of have to sit back and pay attention to how things actually work, to find the folks that you partner with that are going to teach you the ins and outs of the business. It's the same approach to finding a mentor. I mean, one of the things that I've always done is sort of sit back for a few weeks in a new spot and observe, and try to figure out which of those folks that are actually the doers is sort of most resonant with your own approach, your own personality, or is something that you aspire to. And I kind of try to do one of each, right? Like what can I work with now personality wise, and what do I want to be next year or 5 years, and try to connect with those folks and ask for help, right? I think for sure, folks that understand, and I've definitely seen a sea change in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, that this role is sort of less than necessary evil than the norm for sure now. So I've certainly had an easier time as of late saying to, for example, a regional sales manager, hey, I really like the approach you take here and here. Can we like work together and figure out, how I can help you, how you can help me? I think taking that sort of proactive approach, especially as an in-house lawyer, not only gives you someone who will kind of help you achieve your goals, but may give you a different perspective and keep you abreast of things that you otherwise should know of. So it's sort of a let me help you help me relationship that I think I've sought out, that's worked for me for sure.
No, that's great advice. I want to pick up on something you just mentioned, which is the evolution over the last 20 years or so of the GC role. And definitely one thing I've noticed is there's a fortunate trend that I think is still ongoing,
Yeah.
to go from this view of the legal department, as one of my friends used to say, the house of no. Go from that view to seeing the GC and the other in-house lawyers as a strategic resource that can actually help your business succeed by avoiding pitfalls and by even capitalizing on opportunities in IP or cybersecurity or client privacy issues. So could you comment a little bit about the changes you've seen, sort of what's happened and what else you'd like to see happen as we sort of progress on this path?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have seen a movement like you have, in it for the positive. I think for better or worse, I think the way that legal and regulatory backgrounds and environments have gotten more and more complex, I think just by virtue of that, business folks understand that there needs to be this ongoing counsel. And so that's a good thing for those of us who practice in-house. I think the other thing is, the more folks get into this field, and obviously this becomes more and more of a viable career path, the more we have the ability to sort of show our partnership. And I always encourage, so my team is encouraged, and the structure I've had of all of my legal departments is to not be, even if I hire someone in, for example, that's a compliance specialist, they're not just going to practice compliance, they're going to practice holistically something that supports the whole business. And the reason I do that is that I think it's a little self-serving, right? It helps us to show how we can partner with all different departments and how we can bring value. And it adds to that point we were talking about before, that you're better able to serve your client by having a better view. I'd like to see more of that. I think one of the things that I really find sort of interesting and fun in my last couple of years, I've been sort of doing more networking and outreach on certain topics. I think now that I've spent the time that I have in-house, I think I certainly don't consider myself an expert on any particular area, but I think the more that we talk amongst ourselves, the more that we have, and it's great that we have all these communities now, all these resources that didn't exist when I started. the more that we share sort of our best practice partnership stories, right? How did I help my sales person overcome this particular obstacle? How did I advise my company who has this particular regulatory obstacle? The more we can share those stories, and the more we can sort of show the value in that way, not that we have to prove the value, but a little bit you do, I think the better. And I think, I'd like to see more and more of that. I think it's sort of incumbent on us, especially those of us who are GCs, to kind of continue to build those communities and continue to build those stories so that we can continue to practice for a long time in this regard.
Yeah, it's great to hear you hear about your sort of networking journey, because I tend to think of networking as almost crowdsourcing mentorship,
Yeah.
having a group of people that you can talk to both about day-to-day issues that you may be facing and about longer term issues. And I think I see increasingly, especially with a lot of M&A activity and private equity and hedge funds buying and selling companies, there's a lot more movement these days. In-house counsel often have to switch companies every so many years, and you can have a much softer landing if you know your peers out there in the same industry or in related industries. But I also love to hear about you sharing best practices with your peers, because I've heard in literally talking to hundreds, if not thousands, of in-house lawyers over the years that since we founded In the House, one thing I hear a lot is loneliness, professional loneliness, I should say. And you didn't have that law firm period, but a lot of people I think experience when they go from a firm to the in-house role, they feel a little more isolated. I mean, there's many great things about the move, but sometimes they can feel isolated from their peers because they may not be getting out there on a regular basis. Law firm lawyers have to network in order to have business, so it's almost a mandatory feature of the jobs. But I love to hear from in-house counsel who have benefited from networking actively, because I think it's so important, both to, for every possible reason. I mean, even someone to ask those quote unquote dumb questions to, because when you're the in-house lawyer, you're the GC, people come to you for answers, and you have to be the answer person for better or worse.
Right.
And it's always great to be able to call a colleague at another company and say, wait a minute, I'm dealing with this issue. Can you please help me and tell me your perspective on this? Because I guess it sounds like from what you've told me, you never really know what you're going to experience when you walk into the office every day.
You don't. No, it's funny. I've seen the same movement. I think it's great that there are so many resources now. I mean, I remember back to early days. I mean, my first job there were two of us, but I've had a handful where I've been the only. And even without the law firm's in-house move, being the only is very isolating. And when there weren't the same resources available, weren't these communities that have been generated. I mean, I was lucky enough to have built a little bit of a cohort of individuals, right? Some from law school and some that I happened across, because you get to a point. I mean, no one can know every single answer, and you certainly, the questions that you haven't dealt with before, the dumb questions like, what does this mean, right?
Exactly. How do you pronounce indemnification?
Right. Exactly.
So
so it's go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you about law firms, since you raised outside counsel. What has been? I've like some questions I like to ask that I call magic wand questions. So imagine you had this magic wand that could change something or some things about the legal services industry. What would you wish for ideally? And what are some of the most important qualities that you think make a law firm stand out to you as a general counsel?
I think more of what we were talking about previously. One of the things, and I have seen some movement in this area, a better understanding of, and I guess it's a better understanding of a GC sort of in-house role, the cross-functional nature of the kinds of issues that I bring to a law firm. Obviously you'll bring an employment issue to your labor and employment attorney, but a better sort of proactive approach to understanding how it fits into the whole construct of the company. I've been fortunate enough, especially here at my time at Global Force, now Workhuman, to have some really great examples of firms who have sort of taken the time to step back and say, okay, well, let's build a team of folks that understands what's the company's mission, what is the company's solution, right? What's the makeup of your employee population? Where are you located, right? Those fundamental things that help you better serve your client and give, right? Sometimes you can give advice that in a vacuum isn't the right advice. And if you had just known the context that the advice was sort of within the mix of, you would have given a better answer. So that would be my magic wand ask. But again, I've seen some really great movement in this regard. I think the other thing is sort of responsiveness to particular scenarios. For example, so Workhuman is an Irish company, so I have both Irish outside counsel and U.S. outside counsel. Our Irish outside counsel, McCann Fitzgerald, one of the things we were struggling with is, right, I sit in the U.S. and Ireland, there's a huge time difference. So to try to get advice, sometimes on a very pressing matter, was difficult. One of the things that they've done in answer to ourselves and lots of other similarly situated clients is to open a New York office of Irish expertise that sits in New York and is available on the same time zone, and right, they're traveling to and from all of these locations. So movements like that, sort of listening to the particulars of your client base and sort of making things easier, making a path of communication easier between clients and law firms, is absolutely where it should go. And I'm hopeful that there's more movement in that way.
Yeah, that's one of the initiatives we're trying to start it in the House, is try to have what I think of as extracurricular discussions between law firms and in-house counsel. So talk about that elephant in the room. You know, how can we be better? How can we better serve the interests of the in-house legal community and the interests of their internal clients by serving the business objective? And I have this concept that for myself, which I call the triple bottom line. And I say every outside counsel should try to succeed, number one, from the legal perspective, so prevailing if it's a litigation, or getting a great deal if it's a transaction. But that's only the start, right? That's a given. The second piece is serving the business objective of the client. And the third, and I think equally important piece, is helping the career of your in-house contact. So whether it's a junior person at a huge legal department or the GC directly, they should come out smelling like a rose at the end of the matter to their boss, whoever that is, whether it's the CEO or some mid-level person in the legal department. And I think outside counsel are so busy, they sometimes forget to think, well, did I leave my contact in a better position at the end of the day than when we started? Because in-house lawyers also need to advance to the next level, and they need to have a personal success, not just a success for the business or a success for the law firm. So I'm always urging that sort of, I guess, 360 view of each matter. And hopefully, sounds like from what you're saying, law firms are at least starting to wake up and sort of view things in a more holistic manner. That's certainly the hope.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with your last point, especially. I think I've certainly seen some of those things happen with the various outside firms I've engaged. But to your point, I think sometimes, unless as in-house counsel you bring it up, right? Let's make sure that this comes off looking like, or you connect me with someone who might be 5 years down the road, someone I'm interested in, right? Unless you bring it up, sometimes it's not in the front of their minds. So for sure, I would like to see that on behalf of our entire population of in-house counsel. We certainly need the help as well.
Right, and that's a great point. And I also, I think it's important that in-house lawyers sort of assume that leadership mantle of not necessarily assuming that their outside lawyers know the business objective, but articulating it for them. And you know, I dare to say that sometimes the in-house lawyer may just be putting out a fire and may not have even done enough introspection themselves to realize, okay, why are we doing this? Why are we threatening a suit? Why are we doing this, that, or the other thing? Let's make sure that what we're doing. So I think it is a helpful guide for the in-house lawyer as well. So that's an excellent point. And one of the things that in the house that we encourage is in-house lawyers should feel empowered and realize they're the buy side, right? It's okay to demand that law firm do things the way they would like to see things done, and they should feel fully empowered, I believe, to do that. Let's talk a little bit about sort of before and after. I'm always curious to hear about, now that you've been a GC for several different companies, what are some things that surprised you about the role that you might not have anticipated going in?
Hmm. I would say the thing that probably surprised, I've been reflecting on this the last few years or so, that the myriad of types of issues, right, looking back over 20 plus years that have come to me in my in-house or general counsel purview is still amazing to me. Certainly, and it's partially, I mean, it's probably holistically the reason why I continue to kind of come back day in, day out, because it's always different. Certainly they're always the same, right? You've got to make sure your contracts are done. You've got to advise your HR folks and deal with labor issues. You've got to make sure you're managing your IP portfolio. Not those things, but certainly there's always been especially in my particular practice and in technology, there's been this sort of changing regulatory background. For example, right, data privacy and GDPR, right? That's a whole new thing, and that's certainly not something that I ever sort of as heavily focused on as I do now. Things like equal pay, right, that we all hoped would come now are sort of things that are squarely in both HR and legal's purview. But I guess even more surprising, at least with respect to my own career, one of the things we do at Workhuman now is, and this is kind of how we got our company name, we have historically had a customer forum, which turned into an event that we called Workhuman, now called Workhuman Live, and we've had lots of talent that comes to speak and is sort of a draw for that event. So one of the things that's in my purview in my current role is physical security, which, believe me, I was no physical security expert, but I've learned an awful lot about it. Even to the point of when we had Michelle Obama a couple of years ago as a speaker, I had to coordinate with Secret Service, which was, so the range of things and folks that I have had to deal with is, as much as general counsel is walking a tight line, it definitely exposes you to some very interesting issues and things that are way outside what I thought I would be exposed to when I thought about it from law school. So it's interesting.
That's great. One common theme I've heard from you is that you really need to constantly learn on the job to be successful as a GC. And I'm wondering if you can share with our viewers some of the habits that you've developed that you think have contributed to your success as a general counsel. And also maybe the flip side, are there any sort of bad habits that maybe some lawyers tend to have that they should really give up if they want to forge a successful in-house career?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I have sort of a little more time nowadays that I have a team and I'm not the only one. I certainly have tried to reserve some time, if not every day, at least every week. I'm sure lots of folks listening know what this is like, right? You get articles and you get magazines and you see an interview and you have this pile of things. I should really read that. I should really get to it. So for many years, I would struggle to sort of cram some of that in at the end of the day or on the weekend. I definitely now carve out time for myself, and I feel like, especially in a GC role, it's sort of incumbent on me to kind of keep up with all of those things. So I carve out a few hours a week to make sure that I am just reading, and it's not even necessarily legal periodicals. It's technology changes and discussions of new technologies like AI and Bitcoin and all of these things, so that I know kind of what's happening. I think that's definitely been a huge help to me because, no matter what industry your client is, there's going to be a parlance. And if you are using that same parlance, then you're even better able to serve. So for me, that's been helpful. I think, thinking back to how my approach has changed from the beginning to now, we go to law school and we all say sort of tongue in cheek, you learn to issue spot. And there's not, there are certain folks who believe there's not much else that we take from law school to what we do now. But I will say in the beginning, I was a great issue spotter. And one of the things that I made as an early on mistake, and then I sometimes see lawyers do now, is to sort of issue spot out loud or issue spot in an email. I mean, nobody uses really memos in-house anymore, but I think the thing that I shifted that has really helped me is I still issue spot, believe me. I issue spot in my head all day long. I just don't say it that way. So I sort of say the opposite, or really sort of start with the solution rather than the issue. And I think it seems like a subtle shift, but it's really a complete reversal. I think that's the one thing, especially in a company, no matter what industry you're in, tech or otherwise, you're always trying to sort of get to the bottom line or to the results or to the product release or to the, so if you can sort of to yourself say, well, here are the 5 issues. Okay, what would be, and bring it to your executive team, your board, your CEO as a solution, right? That not only helps the bottom line of the business, but it like we were talking about earlier, it shows your value as a partner, right? You're all sort of rowing in the same direction in that regard. And I think that's, for me, been the most helpful construct to work within. And certainly the thing I'd like to see, I've seen other lawyers do that I would sort of say, oh, maybe you want to think about that a different way.
Right. That's really wonderful advice. I mean, when I was a partner at a big firm, I used to say to the associates, don't come to me with issues. Certainly don't go to the client with issues. Come with solutions. You can
Right.
spot the issues, but then you're right. You have to kind of bite your tongue and wait and think, well, I need to at least come with some proposed solutions.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm going to raise issues. And that's hugely important, whether I think you're outside counsel or in-house counsel. So thank you for that advice. I think it's very valuable. Speaking of advice, I love to ask GCs whether they've ever received any particularly good career advice or maybe any particularly bad career advice, and please don't provide attribution to any bad career advice. But if there's anything like any good or bad legal advice that, or career advice that you've gotten that you'd like to pass on to our viewers.
Well, I won't attribute this one, but the worst legal advice worst career advice I ever got was to along the lines of be a loudmouth, be the tough guy in the room, make sure they think you're the bulldog, right? That's not always the best approach. The best advice I have ever received was really in-house practice, especially as general counsel, you will be in the fire, right? You will be in the heat of a battle at least once, probably hundreds of times. Your reaction, your sort of immediate reaction will be, I need to respond, I need to do this, take 5 minutes, breathe, and then respond. That was absolutely the best advice. I have used it countless times. I always have a more reasoned, rational response, piece of advice, conversation. It seems like such a simple thing, and it's not really. I mean, you can apply it across the board, but it works for me.
Right. That's fantastic advice as well. I think I'm a parent, so I think it can help with kids too.
Certainly.
I know to react to the spill immediately. Take a deep breath. So I often like to close these interviews with talking about the future. So maybe get out our crystal ball a little bit, and what are some of the issues that sort of you see coming down the pike for GCs or for the broader legal community, for law firms, and what do you think we should all be thinking about as we go into the future?
I think, and this is certainly biased by the world that I live in, right? This HR-focused world now, but I think there are some good trends that are coming out of what I'm seeing that I hope and I think we will see lots more of. As I mentioned earlier, right? Things like equal pay that were sort of aspirational for folks a few years ago, right, are now in state laws, are now becoming operationalized within companies and other organizations. I think we're going to see a lot more of those kinds of issues. And so focus on those kinds of your practices in-house, right? Being really aligned with your HR folks, understanding how they're advertising and recruiting and hiring folks. I think all of us in-house would be best served to kind of pay a little bit more attention to those, because I think there'll be some more changes. I think the other thing is and certainly seeing this more at the board level, but flowing down is this corporate social responsibility. It's such a hot topic now. How that gets operationalized and what role in-house counsel plays there, and how you can sort of shore up if you've never done that before, if you're not in that world, what do you need to know, and how can you advise your client who may want to undertake a pledge or an association or an affiliation. I think for sure, and it's a good thing, right? I think certainly the movement toward having companies not only sort of let go of some of the bad practices, but undertake really to do good is wonderful. But I think it's certainly, at least for me, was a new area, and I hope to see more of that.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I do think that lawyers learn on the job, as well as even a little bit at law school, how to sort of look at an issue from every possible direction. And I think successful GCs often learn to take that talent and transform it into a bridge building talent. So you can see the perspective of the HR department or the CTO or the CFO, and use that talent to build those bridges, because I do think GCs can do very well by trying to be the glue that sort of holds everything together. And
Mm.
that's a sort of a natural role if you're willing to sort of put yourself out there and play that role. So I think that's great. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers, either something about your company or other advice you have for the people that are listening?
I think, well, I mean, my company would have my head if I didn't in some way encourage folks to just think about, especially, and it's funny because it's certainly in the role of, especially with the compliance lens, right? General counsels don't often think about thanking other people and gratitude. But I will say, regardless of using a solution like my company's solution, Workhuman solution, or others, I think the other thing that has been, and certainly I've been here 12 years, so I've been here long enough to see how it plays out. Sort of thinking, to your point of being the glue that holds things together, thinking about how to not only look at someone else's perspective, but to just take a moment to thank folks who you deal with, right? Oftentimes, especially us lawyers and other, finance folks, we're not recognized all that much, and you'd be surprised how much a little recognition goes. It goes a long way. So I've given my kind of spiel to gratitude. So
Well,
that's all
that's the
I had.
perfect note to end on, and thank you for being a guest on GCTV.
Thank you for having me.